In my opinion, the all-new Mazda 3 Turbo is exactly the kind of near-luxury vehicle that brands like Acura and Buick have been promising but failing to deliver for quite a long time. Mazda has a well-deserved reputation for building fun-to-drive vehicles, but over the last few years they've been trying to tweak that reputation to have it include more premium models like the top-end trim of the Mazda 3, the top-end trims of the CX-5 and CX-9 as well. And if the rumor mill is correct, we should soon be seeing some rear-wheel drive Mazdas with inline-6 engines under the hood. But back to this Mazda 3 here. This has quite simply, I think, the most attractive front-end design inside or outside the mainstream segment. Whether we're talking about the Corolla or the Civic or the Forte or the Elantra, I think the Mazda 3 is quite simply prettier. And this, I think, has the looks to stack up against a number of luxury entries. I think this is a little bit more attractive, for instance, than the current generation BMW 2 Series. More than simply the sheet metal and plastic going on up front, the Mazda 3 also has a different proportion than the average mainstream vehicle in this segment. We have a longer hood and a longer dash-to-axle ratio than is common. That's mainly due to the way that Mazda has chosen to design their engines and specifically their exhaust manifolds. This is an optical illusion that Volvo has been playing in the luxury segment to make their front-wheel drive based vehicles look a little bit more rear-wheel drive, and we see the same sort of thing here in the Mazda 3. Bringing the Mazda 3 upmarket makes a lot of financial sense for Mazda because sedan sales are dwindling across North America, but luxury sedan sales and premium sedan sales don't seem to be dwindling quite as quickly. When you take a look at entries like the Acura ILX, which I think this is a very direct competitor to, or of course the BMW 2 Series, etc., this sells in greater quantities, and if Mazda can bring the average transaction price up, they could be making an awful lot more money off of these than Acura is with the ILX. Moving to the back, we find a simple and elegant design language that's a little bit more home in some of those luxury brands, honestly, than in most mainstream vehicles. The interesting thing about the Mazda 3 Turbo is that this is not even attempting to be a replacement for the Mazda Speed 3. With this vehicle, Mazda's going in an entirely different direction. We have full LED taillamp modules. This is a pretty rare feature in the mainstream, and even in low-end luxury vehicles, it's hard to find full LED modules. So the turn signals and the backup lights are LEDs as well. Down at the bottom of the bumper, we get twin exhaust tips. Now let's take a look under the hood. In a move that would definitely be appreciated by the Fiat Chrysler conglomerate, Mazda has decided to take their most powerful engine and just jam it under the hood of everything in the lineup. From the Mazda 3 to the CX-30, CX-5, CX-9, everything gets this 2.5-liter turbo engine. This produces 250 horsepower and a whopping 320 pound-feet of torque. As far as turbocharged 4-cylinder engines go, this is among the torquiest that you can find outside of some really high-performance vehicles. This is mated to a standard 6-speed automatic transmission and standard all-wheel drive. The all-wheel drive system is a pretty big differentiator between this and something like that Acura ILX. Not only does it not have nearly this much power, it doesn't have all-wheel drive either. The all-wheel drive system is also a huge differentiator between the Mazda 3 and pretty much every one of its mainstream competitors, from the Corolla to the Civic to the Elantra N-Line, and of course the Volkswagen GLI as well. Really, the only vehicle in this segment that also has all-wheel drive is something like the Subaru Impreza. But the Impreza is going after a different shopper. It's not nearly as premium as this, and its design is getting pretty old. Now, there are two downsides you should know about. If you feed this regular unleaded, power and torque levels will drop. I found that unusual because the new Hyundai and Kia 2.5-liter turbo will produce 290 horsepower and 311 pound-feet of torque even on regular unleaded. The second downside is on this side of the engine bay. It's an older 6-speed automatic transmission. Now, admittedly, that's less of a problem for the Mazda 3 or the CX-30 than it is arguably for the CX-5 or the CX-9, because in this segment, CVTs are a bit more popular. And personally, I would rather have a 6-speed automatic over a CVT if I had the choice. But if I did have the choice between this and a more modern 8, 9, or 10-speed automatic, I would probably choose the 8 or 10-speed autos that we find out there. Driver's seat comfort is excellent for a compact mainstream sedan. We have a multi-way power driver's seat with a 2-way adjustable lumbar support, 2-position memory over here on the dash, which is unusual for a mainstream car, and then we have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion. One thing that's a little bit at odds with Mazda's premium mission, however, is that the passenger seat remains a manual seat even in this top-end trim. And I really wish that Mazda had given it power functionality similar to what we see over here on the driver's side that would really have matched the more premium aspirations that Mazda has for this. At least for me, the back seat of the Mazda 3 is one of the most comfortable in the compact sedan segment, mainly because of the amount of headroom that we find back here. With my head back here against the headrest, I have about ½ an inch of headroom, and headroom is really at a premium in a wide variety of sedans, not just in the mainstream segment, but also luxury sedans as well. Now, legroom is a little bit more compact than we find in some of the competition, but I could probably forgive that for the added headroom. Now, if you are planning on putting child seats, especially rear-facing child seats, in your compact sedan, keep in mind that that legroom figure is going to become more important. If I try and sit here in the middle, you'll notice that there's no getting away with it. This really is a bucket-shaped rear bench, and I do have to crane my head really to one side in order to fit back here. Also, the laws of physics have to be obeyed. There's just not as much legroom as you might like. This front seat, all the way back in its tracks, I really couldn't even put my legs behind it. On the other hand, rear seat passengers are definitely going to be impressed with the materials quality because the rear doors are finished almost identically to the front doors, and that's something that we don't find in most of the mainstream competition. So we have a stitched insert right here, very similar trim and shiny bits going on, a soft touch armrest below, a soft touch insert here, and then a soft touch injection molded upper section of the door. I have to say I'm also pretty surprised that we don't find air vents for the rear seat passengers. That's something that I really would have hoped Mazda would have addressed. Behind this trunk lid, we find 13.2 cubic feet of storage space, which puts this in direct competition to pretty much every other compact sedan out there. This cargo area is certainly larger than the one you'll find in many subcompact luxury vehicles, which you could logically compare with the Mazda 3 Turbo. Entries like the Mercedes-Benz CLA, or perhaps the current generation Audi A3, or the BMW 2 Series. Obviously, those are all going to feel more refined than this, and they're going to have more power if you choose the right options versus this, but they're also going to cost an awful lot more. And due to a lot of the design considerations going on in those full-on luxury small vehicles, they're not going to have a trunk or an interior nearly as accommodating as the Mazda 3 either. And in case you're wondering, yes, there is a spare tire. This is one of the donut variety. A full-size spare tire wouldn't fit. In the ILX and Auto's exclusive Trunk Comfort Index, I'm going to give this cargo area 9 out of 10 points. We have a helper handle to help close the trunk, which is something that even a lot of luxury vehicles miss for some reason. We also have a reasonable amount of room, especially compared to some of those luxury entries. In contrast, most of the mainstream competition gets notably less premium as you move rearward. That's the nice way of saying a little bit cheaper. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof right here over the driver and front passengers' heads, height adjustable shoulder belts, and height adjustable headrests for the front passenger. The seat back and bottom cushions feature perforations, but these seats are not actively ventilated. That is something that I would love to see in the Mazda 3 because it is something that we see in some of the Korean competition at lower price points than we see in this Mazda 3. Again, moving over to the front doors, we find that same sort of attention to detail that we found in the back doors. The big difference up here is that we do find some metal speaker grates for the optional Bose audio system. As we move on over to the dashboard, I apologize for having a black on black interior. This is just what Mazda sent me, but it is a little bit more difficult to film than some of those lighter colored interiors. On the passenger side, we find a lot of soft touch materials, both upper and lower, but obviously hard plastics down there at the bottom of the dashboard. We have this interesting dual air vent arrangement for the passenger, one over there on that side, one over there on that side, and then just sort of a blank air vent in the middle that gives it sort of an Audi 5000 vibe. The glove compartment is one of the slot varieties, but it's just a little bit too small to accept a 10-inch iPad. In the middle of the dashboard, we find Mazda's latest infotainment system. This is not, however, a touchscreen LCD anymore. Instead, Mazda's decided to double down on their rotary controller in the center console. Mazda claims that this particular interface is a little bit more intuitive and a little bit safer as far as eyes off the road, but I have to say that the touchscreen system that we found in the previous generation was a little bit easier to interact for me because you could just stab the option on the screen. If you want to know more about this infotainment system, I do have a separate video on that. It does support Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration. This is basically the same system that we see working its way across the rest of the Mazda lineup. Below that, we find the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control systems, also the controls for the heated seats. Below the infotainment screen, we find the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control. There's also a chrome bar that runs right across the dash, helping tie everything together. This is also where we find the controls for the heated steering wheel and the heated front seats. Below the climate controls, we find a large storage area, one USB port, 2 large cup holders right there, and a pretty traditional console shifter. There's a manual mode over here on this side. We pull towards the driver for gear up, which is backwards for most cars. There's a sport mode on-off toggle here, but it's just sport and normal mode. There's no other drive modes involved. This is what the controller for that infotainment system looks like. It's very similar to the previous generation Mazda infotainment system. There's some direct access buttons around the knob. It toggles side to side, rotates around, and then clicks down to enter. Over here we have the auto brake hold button, electric parking brake, and then over here we have the power volume knob, and this also acts as track forward-backward. A complaint that I've had in some Audi models doesn't apply to this vehicle. Passengers' knees won't end up bumping this little button right here because we do have the bolster there on the side. Behind that, we have a padded center armrest. It opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment. We also have an additional USB port in there, 12-volt power port, and then a removable divider so that way your smartphone can hang out there. This slides forward and backward so you can adjust it based on where your elbow's living. This model of Mazda 3 has a windshield projected heads-up display. This is one of the few compact vehicles that has this particular feature. Most inexpensive vehicles with a heads-up display are projected on a little sheet of plastic that folds up from the dashboard. To be honest, however, I would personally trade that little heads-up display for a power passenger seat or perhaps four-way adjustable lumbar for the driver's side. Over here behind the steering wheel, we have a 7-inch partial LCD instrument cluster. So we have a physical tachometer and then physical engine temperature and fuel gauges over here on the right. Everything else is part of that LCD in the middle. The theme of the LCD does not really change based on the drive mode, however. I do think that's a missed opportunity. I would have loved to see more animations and more variations going on with that display. The display does change a little bit based on what you're doing with the information in the middle. For instance, we have a display here for your active safety systems. There's also a mode where there's no information in the middle, and then you can roll through some of those additional information screens. The steering wheel is Mazda's latest design. It looks like it has a split bottom spoke, but that is in fact filled. We also don't have very aggressive sport grips up top. On the back of the steering wheel, we find paddle shifters down on the left and up on the right. They're very small, so they're a little bit difficult to see there. The size of the paddle shifters does give the steering wheel an elegant and thin look that we don't see in some of the competition that really has some tall elephant ear style paddle shifters. On the left side of the steering wheel, we find buttons for the infotainment system along with the voice command button, and then on this side we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system. A nice touch that we don't even find in that many full-on luxury vehicles in this size category is an available 360-degree camera system. It's accessible via a button to the left of the steering wheel, or of course it's automatically engaged when you put the car in reverse. There are a number of different views you can choose from. You can toggle through them using that camera button on the left side of the wheel. The last time I drove the Mazda 3 Turbo was the hatchback, and I compared it mainly against mainstream vehicles. A lot of folks out there were asking me, how does it compare to near luxury or luxury entries? So let's talk about that in this video. I'm just going to go ahead and pop the scores up there at the top of the screen, and then let's talk about how this compares. 0 to 60 happened in 5.8 seconds. 60 to 0 happened in 120 feet. That is 1 foot shorter than the hatchback version. Essentially identical. It's pretty much just the margin of error there. The biggest thing you'll notice about the Mazda 3 versus something like a BMW 2 Series or Audi A3 or the Mercedes-Benz A-Class or CLA or even something like the Acura ILX or Lexus UX is that this does not have a fully independent rear suspension, even in this turbocharged model. And that does make a difference if you're driving out on rougher road surfaces like the one that I was just on, or if you're driving out on your favorite winding mountain road and the pavement is a little bit less than perfect. The rear suspension in the Mazda 3 will get upset more than any of those luxury alternatives. I have to say I was a little bit surprised by Mazda's decision to not give the 3 a fully independent rear suspension, because otherwise the Mazda 3 is so much fun. 0 to 60 is really not that far off something like a Volkswagen Golf R, and that would be the previous generation Golf R, not the upcoming new one. And for most drivers, it's honestly not going to be very far off something like a Honda Civic Type R. That's because even though the Type R could go faster 0 to 60, it has a manual transmission, and most people aren't going to shift that fast. So generally speaking, in the stoplight races, this is going to be faster than the Type R every time. Now, the 6-speed automatic transmission doesn't have as many gears as we find in the luxury set, but versus mainstream vehicles like the average Civic or Hyundai Elantra or Kia Forte out there, this doesn't have a CVT, and I would rather take a 6-speed automatic like this over a continuously variable automatic transmission in terms of the fun to drive factor. Mazda's also done a really excellent job with the steering. This has a great steering feel to it. We get a bit more feedback from the front tires than we find in a BMW 2 Series or the Audi or the Mercedes. When it comes to handling ability, the Mazda 3 falls behind the European competition. That's mainly due to the tire size and the tire compound that we find on this Mazda 3. The all-wheel drive system is a really great partner, as is the steering. The steering feel is excellent. We get more feedback from the front tires than we find in most of the European competitors, but the tires just don't have the kind of grip that you might hope for. That's because Mazda didn't really upgrade the tires versus the regular Mazda 3. This still has 215 with tires all the way around, and that's definitely smaller than the average European entry. And if you're not so keen on comparing this to an Audi, a Mercedes, or a BMW, These tires are still narrower with smaller contact patches than we find in the Acura ILX and some versions of the Lexus UX. Now clearly that is something that could be much more easily corrected aftermarket, and that lends to the value proposition of this Mazda 3 Turbo. Because even though we don't have the wide tires, you could add wider tires aftermarket. You could put summer tires on this and really improve the grip and have it compete more directly with some of those European or luxury entries. But really nothing that you do aftermarket that's affordable is going to improve the steering feel in something like a BMW 2 Series or the Lexus UX, both of which I think fall behind this Mazda 3 in terms of just the engagement and the feel of the steering rack. So although I do wish that Mazda gave us wider tires on the Mazda 3, I have to say if I had to choose, this is exactly the direction that I would go in. The better feel, the better steering feel, etc., with the narrower tires, because that's something that I could very easily fix. On the other hand, the lack of an independent rear suspension is not something that I could so easily fix. Now, if you're driving out on better paved roads, say the road surface that I'm on right here, you're not going to notice too much of a difference. But if the road surface does start to get rough in those corners, you will notice the difference. Versus the Acura and the Lexus, we get notably more oomph out of this Mazda, especially versus the Lexus, which really is not terribly swift. And I also like the way that this 2.5-liter turbo sounds. It has a good sound to it. Feels a little bit throatier, sounds a little bit throatier than the average 2-liter turbo that's in the luxury and near luxury segment. And it comes across as a little bit more refined than the latest Hyundai and Kia 2.5-liter turbo that we find in their mid-size sedans, although it is worth noting that Hyundai and Kia turbo produces an awful lot more power than this, and it doesn't require mid-grade gasoline. It runs on regular unleaded. Versus the European 2-liter turbos, this has kind of a different feel to it. We have fewer gears than we find in something like the Mercedes-Benz or the Audi or the BMW, but this engine has a larger displacement and an awful lot more torque really than most of those entry-level engines. So even though this doesn't have as many gears, this has a decent amount of pull to it, especially in daily driving and mountain driving situations where the transmission doesn't have to downshift as much as in some of those European alternatives just because of the amount of torque available. Mazda says that they were really trying to give this vehicle the feeling of a larger displacement naturally aspirated engine. I'm not quite clear that that's what they've done, but they certainly have given this an awful lot more low-end torque and a little bit less turbo lag than we find in some of those alternatives. Now, of course, there's still some turbo lag, and of course, there's still some downshift lag, so if I slow down here to say 20 miles an hour and I floor it, there's obviously going to be a little bit of lag, but most of that is the transmission shifting. When it comes to fuel economy, I'm going to give this a strong A with a question mark, because I'm not exactly clear what you want to compare the Mazda 3 to. This certainly comes across as more premium than the average compact sedan. Something like the brand new Hyundai Elantra doesn't have an interior that's quite as nice as this, the steering isn't quite as refined, etc. But some of the alternatives are certainly going to be faster and sportier than this. The new Elantra N-Line, the new Elantra N, obviously those are going to grip the road, they're going to go 0 to 60 faster than what I'm driving right here. And although we don't know exactly what the future holds for the upcoming Honda Civic, I suspect it is also going to excel when it comes to handling ability. On the other hand, the entire package isn't quite as premium as some of the European alternatives, although keep in mind, this is significantly less expensive. In the end, I think that the best direct competitor to this in many ways is the Acura ILX, because the Acura ILX has a more premium logo on it, but it's not necessarily that much more premium than the Honda Civic. It has a slightly longer warranty, it has the Acura logo, a few tweaked interior components, but the bulk of that vehicle really is the previous generation Honda Civic. One of the reasons the Mazda 3 Turbo is so hard to pigeonhole is the pricing. It starts at $30,050 and will top out at around $34,000. So there's a somewhat narrow price range for the turbo model, but there really isn't anything like this in the mainstream, especially now since some of the American manufacturers that had slightly more premium options in this segment are no longer on sale. During the week that I was driving the Mazda, I was constantly thinking about the Buick Verano. That was a great compact sedan, but unfortunately it didn't sell well enough for Buick to keep it on. Let's just breeze through some of the options and talk about them generally rather than specific trims. The Buick Verano reminds me a lot of the Mazda 3 because it wasn't trying to be a luxury car necessarily. It wasn't the luxury brand. A lot of folks put Buick in sort of the premium space where Mazda is trying to be, and it was less expensive than subcompact or compact sedans from most of the competition. But at the same time, it was not trying to be a performance mainstream vehicle like the Volkswagen Jetta GLI that starts at $26,345, you get 228 horsepower, and it's trying to be the sedan variant of the Volkswagen Golf. definitely a little bit different than we see in the Mazda 3. Now, if Mazda had tried to make this a Mazda Speed 3 and they had gone for more performance-oriented suspension tuning and tires and interior treatments and just additional tweaks to the exterior, etc., then it could have been more of a competitor to vehicles like the GLI, or the Forte GT, or the Elantra N, or the Civic Si, or the Subaru WRX. But Mazda chose not to go that route. We don't even have wider or grippier tires on the Mazda 3 Turbo. We simply have all-wheel drive, more power, and then nicer touches on the inside. So definitely more of a premium, more luxurious interior than we find in any of those mainstream vehicles. But Mazda chose not to go in that direction. Instead, they gave us a slightly more luxurious interior, some features and functions that we don't find in mainstream vehicles, and then a larger price tag. With $30,000 to $34,000 being the range for this Mazda 3 Turbo, you can see that it's definitely more expensive than any of these other mainstream options. The Forte GT starts at $22,790. The Honda Civic Si is actually taking a year off. It will be back for 2022, but it's likely going to be less expensive than the Mazda 3 Turbo. The Elantra N-Line, $24,100 starting, and the Subaru WRX, even though we actually get more power out of it, is less expensive at $27,495. But the WRX is much more of a performance vehicle. Now, it's really the only one in this segment that can sort of compete with the Mazda 3 in a way because it's also all-wheel drive, and the rest of the competition is front-wheel drive. The lack of mainstream competition is one of the reasons that Mazda is trying to make some of these luxury comparisons. So let's talk about those luxury options. First, let's talk about the main three from Europe. We have the Audi A3, the Mercedes-Benz A220, and the BMW 2 Series Grand Coupe. The A3 is the least expensive. It starts at $33,300. Now, this is the old A3. We are going to get an all-new one next year. It gets 184 horsepower in base format, so it will be a little bit faster to be inside the Mazda 3 than the Audi A3, but handling really is the big difference between any of these European options and the Mazda 3. The European options generally have better handling abilities to them. We have wider tires, grippier tires, more elegantly designed rear suspensions in these vehicles. You will notice that if you start pushing the Mazda hard out on a rougher road surface, that the rear end will kind of skip over some of that broken pavement in a way that we don't see in the Audi, the BMW, or the Mercedes. But as you can see, it's going to be a lot less expensive. The Audi A3 starts at $33,300. That's almost where the Mazda 3 ends. The A220 at $33,650, and the BMW has the highest starting price, actually higher than the most expensive trim of Mazda 3. So the best way to look at the Mazda versus the Europeans is as a value alternative to them, not really a direct competitor. Obviously, these are very different vehicles. You find an older 6-speed automatic in the Mazda. We don't have a power passenger seat. We don't have ventilated seats. We don't have some of those functions that are available in the German options, but obviously you'll pay an awful lot less for the Mazda. Now, when it comes to looks, I have to say, I love the way the Mazda 3 sedan looks. I think it looks better than the BMW. I think it looks better than the Mercedes at the moment. I do have a soft spot for the Audi A3, so I would actually put it just about equal with the Audi. In a way, I think that the most direct competitor to the Mazda 3 Turbo is the Acura ILX. A lot of that has to do with Acura's brand positioning. Acura is often thought of as a premium brand or a near luxury brand rather than a full luxury brand. So oftentimes they're pigeonholed in a different category than Lexus or Mercedes or BMW or Audi. Now that makes sense because their products end up being less expensive and they're more closely related to their Honda cousins. So the Acura ILX, for instance, is the very direct relative of the previous generation Honda Civic. And when you hop inside, it's obvious that it harkens back to that previous generation Civic because it just doesn't have the same sort of feel that we find in the new model, and some of the controls and some of the buttons and switches are actually directly shared with that previous generation. Under the hood, the ILX gets a 201 horsepower naturally aspirated engine, so it does not borrow one of the turbocharged Honda engines from the Civic. The transmission is an excellent shifting 8-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission, and the ILX is certainly fun to drive. But the Mazda 3 has all-wheel drive and it has considerably more power. So if I were to choose between these two vehicles, the Mazda 3 would certainly be my choice. Also, the ILX, due to its general design age, is starting to feel old. Acura has refreshed it, but again, a lot of the components come from the previous generation Civic. And the Honda Civic is actually leapfrogging the ILX because the ILX has never received this generation Civic's body or underpinnings, and the Civic is getting a complete redesign for 2022. Hopefully the ILX will follow at some point later. We just don't know any details about that yet. But bottom line, the Mazda 3 is just prettier inside and outside. I think it's also more fun to drive than the ILX. The rear suspension is more elegant than the ILX, doesn't get as upset, but we have less power, we don't have all-wheel drive, things that we do find in the Mazda 3. I also think that the Lexus UX is an interesting option here, because for $32,900, it's certainly within the price range of the Mazda 3. I also think the Lexus UX is not as attractive as the Mazda 3. Now, if you take Lexus's word for it, the UX is a crossover, so theoretically you should compare it against the Mazda CX-30 rather than the Mazda 3, but honestly, it really is more of a pregnant hatchback, so you could logically compare it to the Mazda 3 sedan, the Mazda 3 hatch, or the CX-30. The Lexus UX starts at $32,900 and has just 169 horsepower. That's because it has borrowed drivetrains from some of Toyota's least powerful vehicles in North America. You can get it with a hybrid system and a teeny tiny all-wheel drive motor in the back, but it's never going to feel like a traditional mechanical all-wheel drive system, and it's never going to be as fast as the Mazda 3. So what really is the Mazda 3 Turbo? That I'm not quite sure. It's not really the same thing as any of the mainstream performance vehicles with extra power, because Mazda decided to go in a different direction and try and make a slightly more luxurious sedan. But then it doesn't have quite the same kind of feature content that you'd expect out of a direct competitor to the Audi A3 or the Mercedes-Benz A-Class or the BMW 2 Series. Notably lacking are things like four-way lumbar support, slightly more comfortable and adjustable front seats, a power passenger seat, things like that. And then some of the options that you might want in some of those European luxury competitors, like ventilated seats. Although the Mazda 3 certainly has the thrust to compete with a lot of the Europeans, it just doesn't have the handling ability or the handling precision that we find in some of those European options. But on the other hand, it is significantly less expensive, and that means it's an excellent value proposition. So if you're looking at something like the A3 or the A220 or the BMW 2 Series, and you're thinking to yourself, I wish I had something that was a little bit less expensive, perhaps a little bit faster, a little bit more fun than some of those absolute base options, the Mazda 3 is going to be an excellent option. Just keep some of those trade-offs in mind. If I were spending my own money on a vehicle in this segment, I would certainly have the Mazda 3 Turbo on my shopping list, because this is absolutely more my style than some of the more hardcore performance-oriented versions of the mainstream. So I prefer the way the Mazda 3's suspension is tuned over something like the Forte GT or the Elantra N-Line, just as a little bit more my preference. And I do love the value proposition versus the European options, but if I had the money and was willing to spend it, I would probably buy one of those European options instead. Just keep in mind, they're really in a different category. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and what would you be buying if you were looking to spend about $34,000 to say $35,000 in this segment? Maybe you're trying to shop somewhere between these two realities. What would you get? And would you be willing to take a look at something like a mid-size sedan? Because keep in mind that something like a Sonata N-Line with 290 horsepower is going to be $33,300 starting, and an Accord 2.0T is $32,110. So you could actually go up into a fairly powerful mid-size sedan for about the same price as the top-end versions of the Mazda 3 Turbo. Now, you won't get all-wheel drive in those mainstream mid-size sedans, but you may go 0 to 60 a little bit faster, you will be roomier, and depending on the options you select, you may even get a few more features inside the cabin of that mid-size sedan. Let me know down there, and I'll see all of you next week.